Hello, I'm Jared McNett. I'm a political reporter for the Sioux City Journal and a frequent guest on the On Iowa Politics podcast. I'm here today to chat with Democratic candidate James Eliason. Do I have that right, James? The
Yes.
pronunciation there? Okay. And he's running to unseat Republican Representative Megan Jones in Iowa's 6th House District. Hello, James.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon.
Good. So I think maybe the easiest way to start is to just get a little background about you for folks who might not know you. So, how old are you? What sort of work do you do, and where do you live?
I'm 69. I live in Storm Lake. I'm retired. I was most recently a college professor teaching biology.
And where were you teaching at?
I taught several places, most recently at Buena Vista University here in Storm Lake.
Gotcha. And what did you appreciate about that teaching work?
It was really fun to teach kids how to reason and think their way through things because too often they view education as learning facts and learning things they need for their job, whereas what they really need to learn is how to learn and how to improvise and think their way through problems. Because if all you know is facts, then people will look stuff up on the internet. Um, People need to be able to solve problems, not just know things.
Gotcha. And so then what made you want to run for the legislature and maybe solve a different set of problems?
Yeah, so I think that one of the big problems right now is hyperpartisan hyperpartisanship and hyperpolarization, and I'm really focusing on trying to reduce that
Mhm.
because almost always both sides are at least partially right, and trying to demonize the other side for disagreeing with you on policy, I think, is unfair and unproductive. Second thing I'd like to work on is the focus of the legislature. Most politicians talk about working for the taxpayers, which means they don't work for children, they don't work for seniors and Social Security, but they do work for big corporations. I
Hmm.
think focusing on the citizens rather than focusing on the taxpayers is a much better use of legislative effort.
Gotcha. Okay. And before you decided to run, maybe throughout your teaching career or someplace else, what would you kind of point to as some of the proudest accomplishments that you've had?
Oh wow! So certainly for teaching, having students realize what I was getting at. Uh, that is that is learning to learn, learning how to solve problems, and it opened a lot of eyes from some students, and I think that's probably the biggest accomplishment. I've also did some research and published a couple of research papers on in some big science journals.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. And kind of going back to what I was chatting with you a moment about, and kind of maybe giving folks a little bit of a better idea. If you were to be elected in November, what specific issues would you make your greatest priorities next year?
I think a couple things. One, education. The schools are not getting the kind of funding they need. I've talked with the superintendent of schools here in Storm Lake, and she's scrambling like crazy to try to figure out how to get things done for her students with resources that are insufficient. And another thing I think is tax reform. The flat tax that was instituted, I think, gives disproportionate tax cuts to the upper income people, and I think that's going to be a real problem because the surplus was at least in part due to federal COVID money, and that's going to go away. And with less tax revenue and less money from the federal government, we're going to have a hard time getting things done that we need to get done.
Hmm. And speaking of surpluses, there was a lot of coverage last week about the budget surplus that the state has, and I was kind of curious, what would you like to ideally see that kind of surplus put toward in terms of funding programs, maybe?
I think that the primary reason for having a surplus is to have some reserve funds in case of emergencies.
Hmm.
And I think that's a really good general principle. During the COVID pandemic, that was the kind of emergency where you needed to spend it down.
Right.
And it kind of didn't happen. And I thought that was probably not the best idea. At the moment, we don't have an emergency, and I think retaining a reserve is probably a wise thing to do. Like I said, I think the primary thing that we need to spend more money on is education.
And then maybe drawing some contrast here, what do you believe maybe sets you apart or distinguishes you from your challenger in this race?
I haven't done a lot of looking at what my opponent is about. I've been concentrating on what I'm about
Mhm.
and trying to convince people to vote for me because of what I do, not because of what my opponent does.
Mhm.
Uh, there are a couple of things I think that I will distinguish us. One is on the abortion issue. Um, it's my understanding that Megan Jones is pro-life and in favor of lots of restrictions on abortion. She should speak for herself, and I shouldn't put words in her mouth. But I think that we need to have a women's right to choose. It's a very difficult issue because protecting life is always important. Um, but it's really not an issue of when does life begin. The issue on abortion is when does the civil right to life begin, and that's a political issue, not a scientific one. And I think that all rights have limitations. Right, freedom to exercise your religion is a really important right. But if someone claims to be an Aztec and wants to do human sacrifice, we're not going to let that person, you know, exercise his religion. So I think that all rights have limitations, and many rights have age limitations. Right to vote, right to drink alcohol, a lot of other things. And I think that where those limits are set for the best interest of society. And I think the best interest of society put the right to life begin near birth rather than at conception.
And
Because if a fertilized egg has all the civil rights of a 1-year-old child, then freezing embryos at a fertility clinic is kidnapping. Having a drink of wine with dinner for pregnant women is an assault. Every miscarriage is a homicide. Giving the civil rights to a fetus is really problematic. And the fetus is not a full person. If the pregnant woman dies, the fetus dies too, and there's no way to save it. So it's a really tough issue. There are good arguments on both sides, but I think the arguments for allowing abortion are much stronger.
And kind of drilling deeper on the question in terms of what sets you apart, maybe why should voters go with you in November?
Well, I think I'm very qualified to do this job. Um, Legislating is largely writing rules, and I've got a lot of experience doing that. Um, I've been on the state, district, and state convention rules committees 4 times each. I was picked to write the bylaws for the fourth district, along with another person on the committee. And I've consulted on bylaws for county parties, and even the local music boosters, of which I'm a member. Um, so I've had a lot of experience doing that. Um, I care about policy. I was on the state platform committee twice, and one time stayed with 17-hour platform committee meeting because I wanted to make sure my voice was heard all the way to the end. So I have the mental stamina, the experience of writing rules to do this job, and I have a PhD in molecular biology. Complicated issues are not a problem. I know how to handle those, and I write well. Writing for science papers, you learn how to write very precisely, and statutes have to be written precisely. Otherwise, somebody's going to find a loophole and get around the intent of the law without actually violating the law.
Okay, well, those were some of the big questions that I had for you. Is there anything else that folks should know about you before I let you go?
I'm all about community service. I've done an enormous amount of service here in Storm Lake. I'm a member of the Kiwanis Club and served as its president. I serve on the city library board, and I was volunteer of the year at the food pantry. I was secretary for a couple of NGOs that were advocating for South Sudanese refugees. I was a water quality tester for the DNR until they canceled the Iowa program, and other things as well, music boosters, and I'm all about community service, and I want to do that in Des Moines for the citizens of the 6th District and for all of Iowa.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate your time, James. Thank you.